Hey there, I'm Grace.
And I'm Amelia.
And welcome to the Women Invest in Real Estate podcast, where we talk about getting started in real estate, scaling, and we give you the inside scoop about our day-to-days as full-time investors. We are so excited to host 2 free 60-minute trainings on how to get started in real estate investing with a full-time job. You can attend on either Monday, September 26th at 7 p.m. Central or Thursday, September 29th at 1 p.m. Central. In this training, we will cover the 6 different types of real estate investing so that you can figure out which one is the right fit for you, the 4 biggest mistakes new real estate investors make, the 3 most important factors when analyzing any real estate deal, and 3 ways to rent your property. Head to womeninvestinrealestate.com/training to sign up, and we'll see you then. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Women Invest in Real Estate podcast. Today, we have episode 9, and we're going to talk about 5 property management mistakes that you should not make. So, Amelia, you want to get us started with number 1?
Yes, I do. And disclaimer here, do as we say, not as we do. We are even guilty of sometimes making these mistakes. But the best thing about investing in real estate is you don't have to know everything when you start, and you're going to learn so much more just by doing and getting in the game and doing it yourself. So,
right.
Numero uno, and this is a big one, is not using a property management software. And if you want property management to be a full-time job and be all over the place, then go ahead and don't use a property management software.
Collect rent in person, yield maintenance requests via phone calls, sign leases in person. That's how you make it a full-time job.
Exactly. So your property management software should have a couple key components, and we really love Tenant Cloud. It functions perfectly. So it should be able to collect rent. You should be able to submit maintenance requests through it. And also you should be able to sign leases through your property management software.
Yeah. And all of your communication, you can even bookkeep in Tenant Cloud and do some other fancier stuff that I don't even use Tenant Cloud for its full capacity. But like you were saying, there's a reason that these softwares exist. It's because it's an all-in-one. So do everything digitally through your PM. And when you are trying to get people to maybe stop texting you and using the PM software, always back it up with the reason as to why it's beneficial for the tenant. So for example, I had a tenant who wanted to pay in cash. I said, you can't pay me in cash because how are you going to get a receipt? I could take that cash and run and never deposit it, and that would not be a good situation for you. When you pay through my PM software or deposit it at the bank, there's no confusion. We know exactly when you did it, how much, and it all gets recorded, which is for your benefit.
That's such good advice. Always positioning things as to why it's the benefit to the tenant. Same thing goes for maintenance requests. And I know you've used this before. If you have a tenant that submits a maintenance request outside of the property management software, let them know that all requests need to be going through that software because it's so much easier for you to keep track of. And that way maintenance requests don't get lost and never get fixed. So again, position it so it's beneficial to them.
Yeah. Not only can I track it, but the tenant can track and see in Tenant Cloud. Is it resolved? Is it pending? I don't use all those features. I try to update stuff, but it's actually pretty powerful in terms of you can assign the maintenance request to people. You can update it with notes, update what the expenses were for it, all of that good stuff. So PMs can be so powerful for $30 a month. I use Tenant Cloud for $35 a month. There's a free version. I just pay for the $35 because it has more stuff, but some other softwares to use, Avail, Buildium, just anything other than trying to do it without paying the $30. It's worth it.
Absolutely. And this is not sponsored by Tenant Cloud, but I think
it really should be.
We do have an affiliate code that we'll link in the show notes if you are looking for a property management software or maybe looking to make a switch. We'll have an affiliate link that you can use.
Move on to number 2. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you go ahead and take number 2.
So I am a huge believer in this one. And I also, like Amelia said, do as I say, not as I do. Number 2, not setting business hours and sticking to them. So what that means is don't train your tenants that you will reply instantly on Saturday and Sunday, or even at all. So I try to tell my tenants, hey, I reply within 24 hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, excluding emergencies. Obviously, if there's an emergency or a lockout or something like that, you need to get back to them as soon as possible. So what that means is if I'm on my computer on a Sunday and I see a question come in, I should really not reply to it. I should wait till Monday at 8 a.m. and maybe even say something along the lines of, just seeing this as I got into the office. Yes, you can do XYZ or whatever. And I've pulled that on somebody who like over Furnished Finder once. Somebody was spamming me on like a Saturday saying like, is this available? Is this available? And I said, hi there, just got into my office. So I didn't see these over the weekend, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah, this is super important. Again, going back to, do you want your property management to be a full-time job, or do you want this to be, 2 hours of work a week? And
Mhm.
so if you have tenants, right off the bat, you should be letting them know, here's when I'm going to be responding other than for emergencies. And then you need to stick to that. So if a
Mhm.
request comes in at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, don't respond until the next morning, and let them know. If it continuously happens, let them know, hey, remember, I only am going to be able to respond to non-emergency requests during business hours
Right.
these times.
Yeah, and most tenants understand that. And it also comes back to you don't need to tell everybody that you're a mom and pop one man show who has a few rentals. They don't know that you're not a huge business that manages 100 rentals, you know? So that's why I have my business email, my business phone number, and my business page because I'm trying to come off as a business so that there's no emotion, there's no deviating from policies, if that makes sense.
Definitely. So set those business hours and stick to them. Okay, number 3, and this is a big one, is not properly onboarding a tenant. And there's so many components to this, and we'll try to go through them as much depth as we can. But it's really important to set ground rules and train your tenants just immediately starting off. Let's walk through what onboarding a tenant should look like. So it's definitely more work up front to onboard a tenant properly than to just let them move into the property and not do
Right.
anything, but it's going to save you headache down the line. So after you've signed the lease and everything, you should provide them with a welcome packet of some sort that includes instructions in more layman's terms than what a lease is going to provide, because tenants aren't really probably reading through the
Right.
full lease.
And telling them where to set up the utilities, where does their
Yes.
garbage go and at what days. And I always like to provide links too, so people can just make it super easy. But exactly all the questions they're going to ask and all the rules from the lease, get that in a welcome guide and make sure that they know everything up front.
Yeah. And we actually have a property management course, and we provide you with a welcome letter template. So if you're interested in self-managing, check that out on our website, womeninvestinrealestate.com/PMA. There's all sorts of templates that we provide with that course. So there's the welcome packet. Then along with the welcome packet, and this template's also included, is the move-in checklist. So this should be completed within a week of a tenant moving in. And what the move-in checklist is, and this protects the tenant and you as the landlord. It's where the tenant goes through room by room and verifies that everything is in good condition upon move-in. And they'll sign it. They'll note anything that's out of place or anything that may be broken, and then it can either be fixed or it's just noted on there that, hey, this had a scratch on it, or whatever the case may be. So then when they move out, the landlord isn't withholding things from their deposit that were there when they moved in.
And another good example is just expectations in general. On my long-term rentals, you're in charge of the yard. That means you need to weed the beds, the flower beds. I just had someone move in a couple months ago. I drove past, the flower beds are a bit out of control. So to have had either a upfront conversation of, hey, you are absolutely in charge of this, don't forget, or to make sure that's front and center on my welcome guides, that is an expectation that should have been overly explicit so that I don't want to have to charge her a fine. I don't want to have to remind her. She should just do it. But you got to make sure that all of those rules and all of those expectations are up front and understood between both parties.
And then one other thing I would add to onboarding a tenant, obviously you should have the property management software that you're using. So you should be communicating through there, but is to do a 7-day follow-up after move-in. And we actually learned this from our friend Anam, who we interviewed for the property management course that we put together. But she does a 7-day follow-up to make sure that they've completed the move-in checklist and that she's gotten that back. And then she just checks to make sure that everything is good and they're set to go. If there's any maintenance requests that need to be taken care of, then they let her know at that time. And
And
I
this would be a
don't do
great
that.
spot. I don't do that either.
Yeah.
I never even heard of
I
that,
will
but it's
now, though.
genius. This would be a great spot for my long-term rental single families to say, here are some reminders of your rules. Number 1, you're responsible for the yard. This means picking weeds, blah, 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 blah. And just like highlighting again all those rules.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. Use that as a chance to reiterate what you've already covered with them.
Yeah. I have another property where tenants like to leave the garbage cans in the front, which just makes it look, no pun intended, trashy. So when I bought the place, I instituted a $50 fine for leaving your garbage cans out front. I never enforced it, but it worked very well. Well, I have a new tenant just drove by. They're out front. And I'm thinking in my head, well, did I give them that expectation? Did I have that in my lease? Did I make that very clear? That's back on me if I didn't. So either getting it in the welcome guide, the 7-day check-in, all of that good stuff. It needs to be said like 3 different times.
Yeah, for sure.
So number 4, and this one is huge, and I learned, and probably Amelia as well, through getting bit in the butt a little bit by this, and it is not obtaining an estoppel agreement from inherited tenants. Estoppel agreement is a fancy word for a document that reiterates the terms of a lease for a tenant, including anything that might be a verbal agreement, yes, between them and the current landlord. For example, I have inherited, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 10 tenants. And one of them, the pet rent was just completely different than what it said on the lease. Oh, well, the landlord says we can do this or whatever, the last landlord. Or the last landlord actually mowed our lawn for us or whatever it is. So now moving forward, before I close, I make all the tenants sign these estoppel agreements, and I also make them submit any maintenance requests that are outstanding, because I've also closed on a place and all these maintenance requests came through, and it pissed me off because it was supposed to be a turnkey property and all this good stuff. But have you had that situation, Amelia?
I've never been bit in the butt, but I actually heard about estoppel agreements from like Brandon Turner on a Bigger Pockets episode. And so I made my inherited tenants. I've inherited quite a few tenants as well, but also positioning the estoppel agreement as a benefit to the tenant again,
to protect them.
Like, hey, here's what we were told. Is this correct? Or, is this correct? And they sign it. And then keep that estoppel agreement, save it to your Google Drive so you have it forever.
Yes.
So that way there's never any discrepancies over he said, she said type of thing. Go ahead. I was just going to say, like, you covered briefly, but like the key points that an estoppel agreement's going to cover are how much their deposit was, how much they pay in monthly rent, who's responsible for utilities, and obviously, yes, who lives at the unit. Utilities, any verbal agreements that they've made outside of that, and then the lease length. Yeah.
Like so if it's like month to month, or if they have another 8 months in their lease.
Exactly. So it's just making sure that everybody's on the same page. And believe it or not, I've never had this happen to me, but there are people who will sell a property and say that the current rents are, let's say, $900 when really they're $700. So they're trying to make the property look better than it is. And then after they close on the property, the tenants are like, yeah, we're only paying $700. And that's what the lease says. So like, obviously the buyer didn't do a very good due diligence there, but like, it's also so shady for the seller to like lie about that. But
on another inherited tenant. So another thing in your estoppel agreement is pets, which is huge because I charge pet rent and a lot of people charge pet rent. And that could be a huge, if a typical cash flow in a single family is like $200-$300 and pet rent's $50, that's a good chunk of cash flow and it needs to be correct. I inherited a tenant who had a noticed increase because of a pet, and the PM, so I bought this place, it had a PM in place, straight up was not collecting the $50 a month pet rent. I would be so mad if I was paying them 10% of my rents to not collect all of the rent. So I told her, hey, it says this and this. Your rent should be $725, not $675 or whatever it was. And yeah, she started paying it. I have no clue why she wasn't paying it or how the PM did not notice it, but that's a big difference. $50 over 12 months, that's $600.
Yeah, that's a huge
It's a $600 mistake.
Yeah, it really is. Number 5 is not doing yearly or twice yearly or even quarterly walkthroughs of your units. Now, again, guilty.
Guilty. Two
guilty.
guilties.
Yeah. But this is so important because not only is it giving you a chance to get into your units and see what's going on in there, but it's also a chance for you to test everything out, make sure that there's no leaks, the faucets aren't leaking underneath, and because that's going to cause
checking for mold
damage. Yeah, checking for mold, checking for things that if left untreated will make the property degrade, basically.
And when you do quarterly walkthroughs or biannual, when there is a turnover in your head, you should have a good idea of what needs to happen. There is a massive difference in a turnover from a great tenant who maybe lived by themselves with no pets and not much going on, between a family with multiple pets that had a lot going on and lived there for many years. If you know in the back of your head what the condition of the property is, you're going to be so much more prepared to execute that turnover quickly and efficiently. So one way that you can write into your leases the right to do these walkthroughs, and I've heard it done a million different ways. One I have heard is quarterly walkthrough to check under the sink for mold. That's code for I get into the property to see what's going on. What are some examples you've heard?
Checking smoke alarms.
Yep.
Batteries, changing the furnace filter is a common one. Those are really like the two most commons. I have heard of like an old retired man who literally did monthly walkthroughs of his units under the guise of basically, I need to check your smoke detector battery. It's like, I don't got time for that, but like, kudos to you. You got nothing else going on. Like, I'm sure his tenants were great. And if they weren't, I remember a city inspector was telling me this story. Like, he would basically, like, if their unit wasn't up to par, he'd give them a 3-day notice to quit or like, yeah, and they'd have to get it.
Wow.
So he was not messing around, but I think that's excessive, but
yeah. Oh, another one, and I know you had this happen to you, is checking for pests and being on top of pest control. Because you had a situation where you had a tenant who was messy and basically brought back cockroaches, right?
Roaches, baby. Yeah.
And maybe a quarterly walkthrough would have alerted you to the direction that your unit was going. And I also, like with older properties, it's a lot easier to get those pests coming back, especially if there's a history of them. So quarterly walkthroughs could be huge. I'm even thinking of a few of my properties that like I should probably be walking through. I think the tenants are great, but you never know.
Yeah, definitely would have saved me money in the long run to be proactive. And that's another thing, is being like a proactive landlord versus reactive. And it's hard when you have a lot of other things going on to do that. But I'm wanting to move to be more proactive in my business, just like you are.
Yeah. So those are the 5 don'ts we have for self-managing. They're all mistakes. Amelia and I are guilty of probably all of them. But that's the thing with self-managing, is it's an evolution as well as anything in business. And so don't beat yourself up if you're doing some of these, but just know there's room for improvement, and these will all help your business be more efficient and make more money. So definitely pay attention to what we've said and implement it if you can.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to check us out and join our community at womeninvestinrealestate.com and follow us on Instagram at WIIRE with 2 eyes.community.